This is the documented account of a maritime survival event. The individual was isolated on a small vessel with extremely limited resources. Survival in such conditions involves managing severe dehydration and starvation. Psychological endurance becomes as critical as physical survival over extended periods. The primary mechanisms for sustenance in open water are rainwater collection and fishing. This case is notable for its duration, which far exceeds typical survival timelines. Such prolonged isolation tests fundamental human resilience and adaptation. Documented survival events provide data on human limits in extreme environments. The man's small fishing vessel was caught in a severe storm in the Eastern Pacific, which disabled its engine and navigation systems. Adrift and without power, he was carried by ocean currents far from shipping lanes and regular fishing. His initial survival depended on the limited supplies he had on board: some water, basic rations, and a life raft. The life raft became his primary shelter, a critical piece of equipment designed for short-term survival, not a 400-plus-day ordeal. This scenario presents a common survival challenge: converting emergency gear into a long-term sustainable habitat. The Eastern Pacific is known for its vast, remote stretches, where a disabled vessel can drift for months without sighting land or other ships. Survival in such isolation requires managing finite resources while contending with exposure, dehydration, and psychological stress. The transition from a brief emergency to a prolonged existence at sea demands systematic adaptation and innovation. After being reported missing and initial searches finding nothing, he was presumed lost and left to the ocean currents. This began one of the longest documented solo survival ordeals at sea. His survival hinged on moving beyond passive waiting to active resource management. This approach transformed his situation from mere endurance into a sustainable, floating existence. Documented methods show he prioritized securing fresh water, often through rainfall collection. He also focused on procuring food, utilizing improvised fishing techniques with available materials. This systematic management of limited resources was critical for long-term survival at sea. Such documented cases highlight the psychological shift from victim to active survivor in extreme environments. Securing a reliable water source was the survivor's immediate priority upon finding himself stranded. He repurposed available materials, using a tarpaulin and various containers to create a rainwater catchment system. This method provided a renewable supply, crucial in an environment where permanent water sources were absent. The psychological and physiological necessity of water in survival situations cannot be overstated. Dehydration can impair judgment within days. He learned to ration the collected water meticulously, calculating daily needs to stretch the supply between rainfall. This discipline of conservation is a common thread in documented survival accounts, where managing finite resources dictates long-term viability. The survivor's initial food sources were limited to what could be caught by hand in the immediate environment. This included raw fish, seabirds, and small turtles that ventured near the raft. The critical innovation was not just catching food, but using its remains to catch more. He repurposed inedible parts like bones, skin, and offal as bait. Using materials found on or around the raft, he fashioned simple fishing hooks. This transformed random scavenging into a systematic, renewable method for securing protein. The creation of this basic fishing system represents a fundamental survival strategy. It leverages available resources to build a tool, turning passive waiting into active procurement. The individual develops the skill to capture small sharks, pulling them onto his makeshift raft. This act of hunting was not merely for immediate consumption. His methodology evolved into what can be described as a farm concept. This approach represents a shift from basic survival to a more systematic, resource management strategy. In survival psychology, such systematization is a documented cognitive adaptation to extreme isolation and scarcity. The farm concept implies creating a renewable, managed source of sustenance from a hostile environment. This goes beyond mere predation, introducing elements of husbandry and foresight into a desperate situation. It demonstrates a profound level of problem solving and environmental manipulation under duress. The individual began cultivating resources, a survival technique documented in wilderness training manuals. He stored captured live fish and turtles in the water under his raft, a method used to keep food fresh without refrigeration. This practice, known as live storage, prevents spoilage and is common in long-term survival scenarios. Bird carcasses were repurposed as bait to attract more birds and crabs, demonstrating opportunistic resource cycling. Using carrion as bait is an efficient, low-energy hunting strategy observed in various survival contexts. He created a simple solar still, a device that uses evaporation and condensation to purify small amounts of water. This technology harnesses solar energy to produce potable water, a critical adaptation in environments without clean sources. Together, these methods form a basic system for securing food and water, fundamental priorities in any extended isolation event. The raft transformed into a self-sustaining ecosystem, providing both food and a psychological anchor. This phenomenon is observed in survival scenarios, where floating debris accumulates marine life over time. Psychological research on extreme isolation emphasizes the critical importance of maintaining routine. He established a strict schedule for checking fishing lines, collecting rainwater, and tending to his makeshift marine farm. Marking days on a surface and engaging in self-talk are documented coping mechanisms to maintain temporal awareness and cognitive function. Religious faith served as a psychological anchor, a common pattern among survivors to combat despair and the onset of sensory deprivation hallucinations. These hallucinations, often auditory or visual, are a known risk in prolonged isolation without external stimuli. The combination of physical routine and mental discipline forms a vital defense against the psychological erosion of solitary survival. This story is often sensationalized, making it critical to separate fact from common fiction. We do not know the precise day-by-day location path for the entire 433 days, as it is not fully mapped. This lack of complete geographical data is common in cases relying on survivor testimony. Specific, graphic details of every encounter are based solely on his testimony. In investigative psychology, this highlights the challenge of verifying events without corroborating evidence. It underscores the importance of distinguishing between documented facts and narrative reconstruction. Contrary to popular belief, the survivor was not completely isolated during his ordeal at sea. He reported sighting at least 10 ships while adrift, attempting to signal each one for rescue. None of these vessels spotted him, demonstrating how difficult it is to see a small raft in open water. This highlights a critical maritime survival challenge. Visual detection range is extremely limited. Another common misconception is that he merely drifted passively with the currents. In reality, he actively managed his raft, constructing a makeshift sail from available materials. He also fashioned an anchor to help stabilize the raft during storms and influence his direction. This active survival strategy, rather than passive drifting, was crucial to his endurance. Comprehensive medical data documenting the full physical toll after his rescue remains limited. The case underscores both human resilience and the harsh realities of survival at sea. The phrase, "It was a miracle," often oversimplifies extreme survival situations. In reality, survival in such conditions requires sustained, intelligent labor and constant adaptation. The survivor's ordeal functioned as a brutal, full-time job, where every decision carried life or death consequences. This case provides concrete lessons in survival psychology, demonstrating how mental fortitude is as critical as physical resources. Marine preparedness involves understanding environmental threats, from hypothermia to dehydration, and having contingency plans. The survival logic here emphasizes systematic problem solving over passive coping, with each action building toward rescue. The survivor mindset focuses on waiting for rescue, consuming limited resources until they run out. In contrast, the sustainer mindset involves creating systems to manage and regenerate resources. This floating farm represents a low-tech aquaculture system designed for long-term food security. Aquaculture systems like this use natural water cycles to cultivate both fish and plants together. The transition from consumer to producer requires planning for resource management rather than just consumption. Such systems demonstrate how basic principles of ecology can be applied to create sustainable food sources. This approach contrasts with emergency survival tactics that prioritize immediate consumption over long-term sustainability. The floating farm concept illustrates how simple technology can create resilient food systems in challenging environments. The primacy of water in survival situations is a fundamental principle recognized by emergency experts worldwide. This case reinforces the absolute rule that securing water must be the first priority in any maritime emergency. While food is important for long-term survival, the human body can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. The rainwater collection method described was simple but non-negotiable, a basic survival technique that becomes critical in maritime environments. In the short term, having a reliable means to collect and store fresh water is more critical than securing food supplies. This principle applies across various survival scenarios, from maritime emergencies to desert survival situations. The body's water requirements increase in survival situations due to stress, exposure, and physical exertion. Simple rainwater collection systems can mean the difference between survival and dehydration in maritime emergencies. This case demonstrates that preparedness must be specific to the situation. The survivor relied on items already aboard his vessel, highlighting a critical gap in standard safety protocols. This underscores the necessity for a properly registered EPIRB, or emergency position indicating radio beacon, on any voyage. An EPIRB transmits a distress signal with location data to search and rescue satellites, initiating a coordinated response. Equally important is a dedicated, sealed survival kit, maintained regardless of the trip's planned duration. Such kits should contain water, food, signaling devices, and basic medical supplies to sustain life until help arrives. This incident reinforces that technology, not improvisation, is the primary tool for ensuring a successful rescue in maritime emergencies. In extreme isolation, the human mind can become its own greatest threat, as cognitive functions deteriorate without external stimulation. The survivor's mental survival strategy involved imposing structure on time through deliberate tasks and self-imposed routine. This structured approach included maintaining verbal dialogue, even if speaking to oneself, to preserve language processing and cognitive engagement. Psychological research shows that such cognitive structuring serves as a protective mechanism against sensory deprivation and disorientation. Maintaining purpose through these routines proved as vital to survival as physical resources like fishing lines for sustenance. This case demonstrates how deliberate mental discipline can prevent the psychological collapse that often accompanies prolonged isolation. The survivor was eventually discovered alive but severely weakened, having drifted to a distant coastline after the ordeal. This survival record demonstrates extreme psychological adaptation to isolation. The individual developed systematic methods for obtaining food and water from marine sources. This approach contrasts with survival situations where people fight against their environment. The limited space required creating strict routines and mental structures for daily survival. Psychological research shows that establishing routine is critical in prolonged isolation scenarios. The duration represents one of the longest documented solo survival periods at sea. This case illustrates human capacity to adapt cognitive frameworks to extreme environmental constraints.